Buongiorno a tutti. Welcome to the Banker's Bookshelf, your podcast where I invite authors and researchers of the most interesting books and piece of research that transform the way we think about banking and financial markets in the age of technology. Today, I'm happy to have with us Ritavan, the author of Data Impact, that you can see here if you follow this conversation on YouTube. Data Impact is a book that talks about how to generate value from data, how to monetize data, which is one of the holy grails that everybody chases in any industry, but in particular in financial services. Ritavan, welcome to the Banker's Bookshelf.
Grazie mille, Paolo. It's a joy to be here.
It is my pleasure, guys. I just read his book on my flight back from Mexico to Frankfurt, and I found it very interesting. The subtitle of Data Impact is How Legacy Businesses Save, Leverage, Align, Simplify, Optimize, Grow to Win. So, Ritavan, already the title says it all, but tell the audience why they should read this book.
Yeah, sure. So this book is born out of a decade of operating across a whole bunch of industries and within financial services, banking, energy trading, and insurance. And there is a lot of literature out there for tech startups, and there is a lot of case studies written about big tech, but a large slice of the economy and a large part of our lives is driven by legacy businesses in traditional sectors. And so if I saw that there was a gap there was a lack of first principles thinking around how to create value with data in legacy businesses. And so Data Impact kind of tries to plant a seed in that void.
So that's absolutely true. And I like to think first principles. When I read the book, and I just want to read the few words in page 5 of the introduction, it goes like a conversation. The question from somebody to Ritavan is, will the markets trade up or down? Asked the voice from the table to my right. And here is Ritavan's response. I'm not really sure. I don't know the future, I shot back. And then the people that follow me since a few years in my entrepreneurial research and business journey know that I always talk about fundamental uncertainty. So the fact that data in reality do not represent truth in themselves, but they are important. And just starting from that recognition entices me to read the book from end to end. So now, Ritavan, the framework you build in this book is called SLASOG, which sounds like a character of the Lord of the Rings, which in itself is very esoteric. So tell us a bit about that. So what is the approach that you promote to make sure that chief data officers understand how to direct themselves to generate value out of data?
So the way SLASOG was born was I asked myself the question, what would be a structured approach to think from first principles about maximizing value creation through data in legacy sectors, but without becoming too prescriptive? Because I think one of the challenges I make to sort of groupthink and sort of common ways of approaching things is obsessing too much about best practices. Best practices for me is an industrial era thinking, right, where everyone has very similar manufacturing processes, etc., and then you're kind of trying to get to the average scenario as fast as possible. In the digital paradigm, right, where replication costs essentially zero, and in the data-driven paradigm where both replication and personalization or decision-making costs tend to zero, we're living in a world of abundance. So there is no point. The idea of going to best practices by trying to go to the mean is actually meaningless because it's all about differentiation, right? And so from that perspective, I wanted to not be prescriptive and yet give a structured approach to think about value creation. And so the 6 steps of SLASOG are save, leverage, align, simplify, optimize, grow. And save is all about, save was really thought, I was conceived because a lot of people would say, hey, I don't have capital, I don't have money, I don't know how to get started. And so the idea in save is take a step back And instead of trying to do more, try to do less, right? Build your judgment around what really drives impact and what doesn't, and kill the stuff that doesn't. And there's this famous story from Warren Buffett where he said, write your top 25 priorities and then just keep the 5 and delete from 6 to 25. You just want to get rid of them, because it's those hedging bets, right, that ruin impact as an operator, right? This is not a portfolio of financial products. And so the idea in Save is you cut back on this. Once you've done that, you've got like some starting capital that you can then invest. And then in leverage, you want to think like an investor. So you want to deploy your capital in a way that maximizes impact, right? That maximizes returns. And ideally, that compounds over time, right? So one of the other things I speak out against is this idea of quick wins. Let's do something quickly. But what's the point of doing something quickly? Because it's not like the world will freeze after that, right? You're playing the long game here. So play to win big. Don't play to win quick, right? Okay. After leverage, it's alignment. And then...
Okay, stop a second, because there's a lot. Okay, so let's say the pillars are save, leverage, align, simplify, optimize, grow, and therefore you win. So in save and leverage, we said it is expensive to reorganize your operations around the data, and therefore you need to be very deliberate in this decision. Group thinking does not help, you're saying. So you have examples in the book about that. So you say you need to understand what you want to do with the data first. Otherwise, there's no truth you can find in the data. And you need to be more precise in the way you implement that. And therefore, you can start leveraging it in a way you identify and capitalize on the competitive advantage. So you also need to understand which is your competitive advantage. So there is a business discussion, you say, they need to be had in the organization way before you start deep diving into the data to extract the value that you want. And I think that's also where you talk about use cases and that I find very interesting, because I see a lot of consultants trying to simplify the approach of data, like, oh, okay, you get data, this is a use case, just apply it and it will win. But it seems you're saying that, guys, that's not a good approach.
Yeah, so if we take a step back, right, and think about how we think about business. So in the industrial era, you had Taylor, where you had a reductionist approach, right, to businesses. So you took a business and then you kind of broke it down through this reductionism to small bits. You try to improve every step. And in those cases, it was mainly processes, right? So you take your business, you break it down into smaller processes. You try to improve in each individual process, and then you hope the whole sort of structure that's made up of these smaller parts works better. And when we moved to the digital paradigm, right, what happened was, you don't really have processes. And so you start thinking in use cases, right? And I would say, like, a general definition of a use case is person X, taking steps Y to achieve outcome Z, right? Now, the thing with something like this is it makes sense in the digital paradigm because the user journey is linear, right? At any point in time, you cannot do 5 things. You can only do one thing. And so you want to guide the user to a goal. What I actually argue is in the data-driven paradigm, just like we dropped the process-based reductionism of industrial thinking to succeed in the digital paradigm, to succeed with data, you need to drop the use case-based thinking, because a use case is sort of the wrong unit of value, right? And in the data-driven paradigm, you need data and decisions and algorithms are all about signals. It's all about capturing signals and trying to improve decision making. And so the unit of value creation is better decisions. And so you don't want to think in terms of use cases. It's a contrarian take, but I think it's a rational and sort of first principles argument that makes sense.
Also, because you may not find the truth inside those, but at the intersection with many different things. So the behavior that is beyond the decision making is so important, and that's not confined to an individual use case. So that is interesting. And actually, you also say something else, that the customers don't care about technology. And I love that, because I see many startups, many people discussing technology for technology when I talk with a client, but I'm like, the client wants something else. They don't care which technology they use, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and I love to take to quote my favorite French rapper, and what he says is, I don't rap for rappers, I rap for the people, and it's a bit like that, right? Because among technologists, it's really like, who has the biggest biceps, technologically. But hey, the world does not care. That's your game. That's your sort of sports. That's not the people don't care about that. The customer cares about what value you bring them, and so obsess about that. Don't obsess about technological sophistication.
Okay, so now we said you need to know how to invest, saving your money. You don't have to do everything. You need to be very deliberate. And once you do that, you can leverage on your unfair advantages. So you need to understand where is your advantage compared to the others in front of the client, and that is where you start directing your action, right? So that leads us into align and simplify. Tell me about these.
Yeah. So I mean, the way to picture this is save is where you kind of save money to get some capital with leverage. You've kind of sharpened your spear, right? And now with a line, you want that spear with all its power, with that sharp spearhead, to go into the bullseye, right? And so a line is about taking what you already, like, all this that you already have now after saving and leveraging, and then getting everyone and everything, yeah, to go and focus towards the goal. Because unless you achieve that, even if you arrive at your goal, but if your spear isn't sharp, if everything is not pointing in that direction, it'll not pierce the bullseye, right? And so alignment is about making sure that that you have the right operating method to get people on board without telling them what to do, right? I think that's the key.
Okay, let me say something. There is a paragraph that talks about metrics, why metrics matter. So I meet a lot of CDOs that sit on top of their data, and they hope that something comes out of that. Maybe is the data whispering something to me, but it does not, because they haven't defined which are the key metrics they want to. And the key metric is not the generic; it's attached to your unfair advantage, where you know that you can understand the client behavior beyond what the data describes. So you get a connection between you and what happens out there. So why does metrics matter to you?
I think a common sort of phrase that's used is data is the new oil, right? And then you straight away start thinking like, oh, I need to extract it, I need to refine it, I need to store it, etc. But that's the wrong way to think about it, because if data is a commodity, then your HR data about who's gone when on vacation and your customer interactions are the same, but they aren't, right? That they're both data, but they're very different. And so the reason why you need metrics is because you want to have a thesis and you want to measure how you achieve that goal, right? How you go towards that thesis. And unless you do that, right, then you are in this wrong framing of data is the new oil. And just because you're busy storing, processing, and computing on data, you think you're creating value, but you aren't.
So that means as you need to find your matrix, you need to have a thesis if you want to find the matrix.
Yeah, so I think like you read out that the first few lines from the intro of the book, what I basically say is having an education in mathematics and machine learning, and then starting my career as a trader taught me it's all about having a point of view and continuously updating it. So you need to have a clear point of view and perspective on what you want to achieve, but then you shouldn't be rigid about it. And I think that's the point, which is that if you just skip into doing something, effort per se is not creating value, right? You need to take a step back and think clearly, think deeply, right? Have a thesis and be ready to update it. And this is something that Paul Saffo, a technology forecaster, formulated as strong opinions weakly held, and then it's been popularized by Jeff Bezos since.
Okay, so far we said that you can save money being very deliberate. You start leveraging, so you know how to look at the bull in the eyes. And then you align, so you have a thesis. And with the thesis, you identify the metrics that really matter to you. But then there's another problem. Everything is typically complex. And complexity or over-engineering doesn't help. So the simplicity paired to the right metric allows you to move forward, decide, or understand. So what's the power of simplicity here?
Yeah, so to understand why simplicity is important, it's important to understand how complexity gets created, right? Because simplicity means you don't want complexity, you want to remove clutter. But then the first principles question is, where is complexity born, right? And none of us wakes up in the morning and says, let me increase complexity, right? So the way complexity is born, and this is something Joseph Tainter has written about when he was studying the rise and fall of civilizations through a perspective of energy, economics, and complex systems. And what Tainter argues is that complexity is born through problem solving, right? So all of us are operating in a system, right? In a company, in a business, in a team, etc. Something breaks, right? We own products, we own processes, we own whatever, right? So if something breaks, someone in the system tries to fix it in a very decentralized way. And so problem solving that continuously keeps repairing, putting duct tape, improving stuff all over is the source of complexity, right? So problem solving, which is an error correcting mechanism, is the source of complexity, which by definition means, right, that there is no other error correcting mechanism to correct the error correcting mechanism. And that's why simplification has to be an executive priority. And you see this across, a whole load of businesses. But one recent example was ASML, right? They make the most complex machines in the world, lithography machines for chips. And if you read about their legendary chief technical officer, Martin van der Brink, in every meeting he tells the engineers, how can we make it simpler? Because the machine is already complex. And I think every executive should think like that. And you just have to look at the success of ASML. It's the most complex machine in the world. Every unit costs 400 million, right? And yet their chief technology officer is telling everyone, keep it as simple as possible.
So to me, if I'm thinking about a bank that wants to transform with a data-driven capability, first of all, the chief data officer and everybody around the guy needs to understand how to be deliberate in organizing and looking at the data. They need to learn how to leverage that one, so that they know the sense of it. So they have the possibility to create a thesis by which they align themselves with the scope. Now, typically they work in organizations which are overly complex, so everybody wants, to be on a digital landscape as they are today, but it's not possible. So they need to have a good discussion with the business people in terms of how they simplify the processes, how they simplify the offering in a way that whatever insight they get from the data resonates in simple terms, because it's difficult otherwise to orchestrate the new journey. And that's when they start basically optimizing. So they put that in practice. So what is a good example of optimization here?
Yeah, so the core argument in Optimize is have an empirically valid worldview, right? So you need to have a way to model the environment you're operating in, right, from first principles, and it needs to be empirically valid, which means you need to be able to test stuff and check that your assumptions are correct, and optimize within that, right? I'm not telling you to optimize an ML model. I'm not telling you to optimize some, like a process. I'm telling you to have sort of an operating model of how you create value with data. And I think that is what I mean. And you need to optimize that continuously. And that's something you can really decentralize, right? In the sense that when we spoke about leverage, leverage is an executive priority because you need to set the direction and you need to pick 2 or 3 high, asymmetric, high leverage bets. In Align, it's again an executive priority because you want to align your business to those. And in Simplify, it's once more an executive priority because you have to push simplification down. But Optimize is something that's more bottom up, where once you have achieved that, you can let your teams optimize decisions. You need to make sure they're consistent, right? That they're not in conflict.
Yeah, so that's very interesting and important to me because I've been working for many years around the principles of fundamental uncertainty, which means that data does not contain necessarily the truth. So when you optimize, you risk of calling yourself into something that is very detached from the reality, and then it collapses. So it is important that you reconnect all the time with the empirical evidence that tell you that the model you've built corresponded to the behavior. In one of the first episodes in 2024, The Banker's Bookshelf, I hosted Annette Brolos and Erin Taylor talking about an anthropological perspective of economics and financial theory, which is centered on the behavior of the clients and the consumers. So they try to pair the thesis that somebody builds in terms of the digital behavior with empirical evidence of how people effectively are behaving to make sure that the gap between the model and the reality is not that large, and that what allows therefore to deploy and therefore to optimize because you made that verification. So I would say that it's very important that the CDOs, the chief AI officers that want to use data and technology to drive their decision-making processes or the way they reach out to the client also have those steps of verification to make sure that empirically they can verify what the data seems to tell them, right? And continuously they connect. So then they can save money. Instead of trying to do everything, they can be deliberate. They can leverage that one because they know what they want to do. They align therefore to organization as they build a thesis which is linked to their unfair competitive advantage. They decide how to simplify around them the processes, the logic in a way that the power and the spirit of the data enables them to do more. Now they can optimize it because they create a process that basically runs through, but they need to be tied to the reality. So the empirical evidence, and that's when they start to grow, right?
Correct. And the whole point is to grow. And I think this is underappreciated. And you might even think, oh, why do you even need a step called grow? And the reason for that is when you kind of developing your approach, right, with the SLASOG steps, the grow step is your reminder that the point of all of this is to grow, right? It's not to just sort of improve an internal process somewhere. It's not to get lost in the weeds, right? Grow is the big picture. Grow is about why you're doing this. And grow is also to remind you that in the data-driven digital paradigm, this is a world of abundance, right? You don't need heavy capex, right? In bank branches, you don't need heavy capex in complex, in expensive technology systems. Things are getting it's become easier than ever to build something today, to ship it to users and to try to provide value. The challenge, of course, being providing value, right? The rest has become very cheap. And so you shouldn't be held back by what you already have as of, available to you. You cannot give excuses anymore around, oh, I'm constrained in terms of budget. I'm constrained in terms of capability. These are all things that are available now and that you should be kind of bringing together to create value.
Okay, so now we talked about the SLASOG, right? So the framework that a chief data officer or any executive in a financial institution, a fintech, can apply to systematize their expectation in generating value with data. They can learn how to save, how to leverage, how to align, how to simplify. Therefore, they can start optimizing and they have a deliberate strategy on how they can grow, right? Knowing that they're starting from the data that is empirically verified continuously, right, in the making to make sure they're kind. So there are two things that I want to discuss now that we know about the SLASOG framework. The first one is something that you just mentioned. You say in your book that there is quite an important thing, which is what is non-digital. So a lot of people that think data and data new oil assume that that means that all life, all business interaction will be digital, but that is not. I just released a new book myself with friends and Brad King, which is Branch Tomorrow, that talks about the federal branches. We know that they are reducing in number, but not necessarily disappearing. There are markets where they're actually growing, like China and India, because they start including clients and there is still value in some relationships. So what is your take here and an example when you say, guys, data is digital, but life is analog, and the two need to get together?
Yeah, no, I completely align with you here, which is that, like you said, it's like we get into this binary thinking as if it's like, oh, we needed branch before and now we don't need branches anymore, right? Like, so we're physical and now we go completely digital, and the reality is not like that. And I think what you need to think about instead is to say, I already have branches, right? Or if we take a retail example, I already have stores, right? So once you have physical locations, then instead of trying to get rid of them, think about how you can leverage them as engines of data-driven value creation. And so an example of that would be, how can you make that physical, don't treat your interaction in a physical space with the customer like earlier. Think of that as a source of new signal. And there are a lot of examples. But again, retail has been pioneering this with Walmart now, using their stores not just to understand how their customers shop online on their website, but also understanding their in-store behavior. And I have an example of an absolutely epic growth story in India of Bajaj Finance, where they embed their people in stores. So what they do is they underwrite consumer credit, and they have their people at the checkout. When people go to buy washing machines or fridges, etc., and then they underwrite them credit with ease on spot, because not everyone will go online looking for something, and you want to be at the point of transaction. So when you go to buy a fridge, and someone's standing there and gives you credit at a good rate in a safe, reliable, trustworthy way, it's a no-brainer. So you remove the friction away, right? And you build trust. And I think, Paolo, you wrote about this, about your brother trying to start an online store, right? Selling a very high
No,
quality.
not just a store. It was meant to be the Amazon of Italy.
Correct. There you go.
An experiential and learning experience of failure,
Yeah. No,
but an experience of learning.
yeah, but then, I think the lesson there is so important, which is that this is about trust, because there is an abundance, right? Replication costs are zero in the digital paradigm. There is an abundance of opportunity, and hence trust becomes very valuable. And so you want to double down and build that trust, and a physical location is amazing to do that.
There's another that brings us into another topic that transpires from the book that I appreciated a lot, and it's connected to this one. I'll give you this example. In this world of small and medium enterprises, there is still a strong demand for conversations between the clients and the bankers or the provider of financial services around financial planning and financial advice. And of course, you can transform that into a digital tool that allows people to set that themselves. But still, there is an interest from many clients to talk to somebody in the bank. And the reason is very behavioral. To me, the reason is because many entrepreneurs that ask for 10, 20 million euros, to give you an example, to increase their enterprise or to open a new restaurant, they know well that the idea is good, but they can't control the future, which is uncertain. So if something happens, they know that they may need the bank to be on their side. So I think they believe that by sharing their passion with someone who listens to them and understands, they're sort of mitigating the uncertainty that they see ahead, because when the problem occurs, they know they will be able to talk to someone who remembers and understands that. And that is not necessarily part of the data in terms of credit quality, is part of the process. So what you're saying here is that understanding the behavior is so important. I always say that data-driven banking is preceded by data-enabling client. If you don't know why clients are at bay, you will not be able to use the data to do marketing. So you need to use the data to understand behaviors, not to do marketing. And just that is a completely different perspective. So what about behaviors inside this book that talks about data, but as a human at the core of the discussion?
Yeah, like 100%. I think that's the whole message here, which is that data is not born, this is not this is not sensor data of temperature or something, right? At the end, this is about matching supply with demand in a competitive market, and demand is humans, right? Because the humans are the ones we're creating value for. And so the whole point of data is to focus on that signal, on understanding the human better, and sort of serving the human better. Because if you do that correctly, then you don't have to, the rest is almost irrelevant, right? And I think a lot of people just get obsessed about building dashboards, setting up reporting, doing a whole bunch of things that sound very sensible, but then forget the core of this and the whole purpose, which is that at the end it's about understanding your customers better and delivering value to them. And that's actually all you need to focus about. The rest will take care of itself.
So, Ritavan, of the many examples there are in this book that are framed around these 6 pillars of the SLASOG framework, which is the one that you want to share, concluded this episode? Just pick up one of the companies that, or one of the stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is there is a mutual insurer, regional mutual insurer in Germany, and it's an 80 year or so old company, and they ask themselves the question, how do we react to the digital age? And they very early on in the 90s spun out or started out a subsidiary that focused on digital only. And their story of learning and experimentation is very interesting. But the most important thing is that their explosive growth is driven on clearly sort of focusing on their unique strengths, on counter positioning with respect to the rest of the market, and having a clear thesis and building out that thesis. And they have compounded and grown at rates that startups will feel jealous of. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to be a startup to grow double digits, right? If you sort of have an empirically valid view of the world, right? And that's not something that you can create overnight. It's a process, right? It's a lived reality. But if you do that, and if you iterate towards that, you can grow at double digits even as an incumbent, and you should, because the world needs that.
So, Ritavan, that means that this book is not just for data scientists or chief data officers. This book is for business people. They want to understand how they can use data and a review of the behavior of themselves or the people that they read the data towards in order to improve the outcome of their business.
Yeah, in fact, that's the main criticism I've got from people I admire and who've read the book. For example, like Alistair Crowell, who wrote the global bestseller Lean Analytics. I sent him the book, looking for his feedback, and then he said, "Yeah, you shouldn't. You've given it the wrong title, because this book is a book about fundamental business strategy, competitive strategy, and everyone should read this. And if you write data impact, people think this is a technical book about data when it isn't." And I take that criticism, actually, but yeah, it's my first book. But the most important thing is, if you want to create value with data in a business, I think this book is written for you.
Well, but that's why we have this podcast, because the book is good, but beyond the book, there's even more that you can find. And I hope that we discover some of these pearls in this episode 25 of the Banker's Bookshelf. Ritavan, thank you for being with us today. It was my pleasure to share your perspective with our audience.
Thank you, Paolo. The honor was all mine. Thank you.
So I remind everybody that the Banker's Bookshelf is our collective moment of critical thinking. We are inspired by authors and researchers of the most interesting books, papers, and publications, which are finding, or actually some like this one already found their space in the libraries of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs. Data Impact, How Legacy Businesses Save, Leverage, Align, Simplify, Optimize, Grow to Win, is our Banker's Bookshelf recommendation today. I invite you all to follow our new episodes by subscribing to your preferred streaming platform. We are on Spotify, we are on Apple Podcasts, we are on Amazon Music, we are on YouTube and YouTube videos. So thank you for having been with us today, and attend the jingle.